In 1298, Marco Polo named his source, a Turkish mining supervisor called Zurficar. 3 years in Kublai Khan's service, ran the whole asbestos operation.
And we can verify this?
He doesn't exist.
What do you mean he doesn't exist?
No Chinese records, no Persian records, no Mongol court documents. The most important witness to medieval asbestos production appears in exactly one document, dictated by a prisoner to a romance novelist in a Genoese jail cell.
That's our primary source?
That's our only source, and that's the mystery. Not whether Marco Polo was lying, but why his account stands completely alone.
700 years of asbestos history?
And almost nobody else wrote it down.
Asbestos, a conspiracy 4,500 years in the making, is brought to you by Danziger and Diano. If you or someone you love has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, the exposure happened somewhere, a shipyard, a refinery, a construction site, and Paul Danziger and Rod Diano know how to trace it back. Free consultation at dandell.com. That's DANDELL.com.
September 12, 1298. The Genoese navy crushes Venice at the Battle of Curzola. 7,400 Venetian prisoners.
Marco Polo among them.
He's 44 years old. He's been back from China for 3 years. And now he's sharing a cell with a romance writer.
A romance writer?
Rustichello de Pisa. He'd written Arthurian legends for the future King Edward I of England. Been rotting in Genoese prison for 14 years.
14 years? Must have been a terrible writer.
Maybe, but he was just in the wrong navy. Battle of Meloria, 1284. Genoa destroyed Pisa's fleet, and Rustichello was one of thousands captured.
And Marco Polo starts talking.
Marco Polo starts talking, Rustichello starts writing. Franco-Italian, the prestige literary language. Dictated memoirs of the most famous journey in European history.
From a jail cell?
From a jail cell. And here's what makes Marco Polo different from every other medieval writer who mentioned asbestos. He names his source.
He what now?
He names his source. Quote, I, Marco Polo, had a Turkish acquaintance of the name Zurficar, and he was a very clever fellow.
Zurficar.
Probably a corruption of the Persian name Zülfikar, means possessor of the spine. Zurficar had spent 3 years in Kublai Khan's service, quote, engaged in the extraction of this salamander.
So Marco didn't just see asbestos cloth, he interviewed the guy running the mining operation.
For 3 years.
And we can verify this?
No.
Of course not.
No Chinese court records, no Persian chronicles, no Mongol administrative documents. The name appears in every major manuscript tradition of Marco Polo's travels, French, Latin, Tuscan, all of them. But outside Marco's account, nothing.
He's a ghost.
The most important witness to medieval asbestos production exists in exactly one source, 150 surviving manuscripts, all traced back to a single conversation in a Genoese jail cell.
That's either the most important eyewitness testimony in medieval history or the most elaborate invention.
And here's the thing. The content points to eyewitness.
Walk me through it.
What Zurficar described, what Marco Polo recorded, is an industrial process, not magic, not legend. They dig into the mountain until they find a vein, extract the material, crush it, pound it in copper mortars, wash it to remove the earth. What's left are fibers, quote, like fibers of wool.
And then?
Spin them, weave them, make napkins, tablecloths. They come out dingy, grayish, but here's the trick. You throw them in the fire.
And they come out white.
White as snow. Fire cleaning. The organic impurities burn off. The mineral fiber remains.
That's not mysticism, that's quality control.
And 7th century Chinese sources describe the exact same process.
Okay, wait, we've been beating this dead lizard for 7 episodes.
Salamanders aren't lizards.
What?
Amphibians. Moist skin. Related to frogs.
Dude, you're just now telling me this? How many times have I said lizard?
A few.
7 episodes.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, medieval Europeans thought they lived in fire, so I guess scientific rigor wasn't anyone's strong suit.
Fair point. Anyway, Marco Polo says, and I quote, "The salamander is no beast. It's a mineral, not an animal." But here's what changes everything. He wasn't the first to figure this out.
The Chinese.
1,000 years before Marco Polo was born, 237 CE, firecloth arrives as tribute at the Wei dynasty court.
And they believed it?
No. The previous emperor, Chao Pi, had publicly declared that fireproof cloth was impossible. He'd had a skeptical essay carved into stone.
Oh, no.
When the tribute arrived and worked exactly as advertised, they had to scrape his essay off the monument.
History's first public retraction.
The Chinese had a name for it. Hu Huan Bu. Fire wash cloth. Fire laundered cloth. The same fire cleaning process Marco Polo described a millennium later, 5,000 miles away.
But here's what I want to know. Did the Chinese think it came from salamanders?
No, they had their own mythology, completely different.
What was it?
Fire mice.
Fire mice?
Huo Shu, giant rats living in fire mountains, fur so long it could be woven into cloth.
So Europeans invented fire salamanders, Chinese invented fire mice.
Same material, same properties, completely independent mythology.
Two cultures trying to explain the same impossible thing.
And both getting it wrong. But the technical descriptions, the mining, the processing, the fire cleaning, those match perfectly across 1,000 years and 5,000 miles.
The lies were different, the truth was the same.
And by the time Marco Polo arrived at Kublai Khan's court, asbestos production was bureaucratized.
Bureaucratized?
1267, a finance minister named Ahmad Fanakati submits a proposal encouraging investment in mineral fiber acquisition. Mining operations expand in the Xinjiang region, exactly where Marco Polo places Zurficar's operation.
So he's not describing something exotic, he's describing a government program.
A supply chain. Miners in Central Asia, weavers at court, diplomatic gifts for foreign dignitaries.
Including, allegedly, a pope.
We'll get to that.
Speaking of people who documented things others wouldn't, if you're facing a mesothelioma diagnosis, the records matter. Danziger and Diano, Dandel.com.
So here's the story everyone knows. Marco Polo returns to Venice in 1295. He tells tales of Kublai Khan's wealth, millions of this, millions of that. His neighbors mock him. Marco of the Million Lies, Il Milione.
The Man Who Cried Wolf, medieval edition.
On his deathbed, friends beg him to retract his fables. He refuses, quote, "I have not told half of what I saw."
Defiant to the end.
It's a great story.
It's not true, is it?
Almost none of it.
Oh, of course.
The nickname Il Milione, Marco of Millions, the earliest documented source is Giovanni Battista Ramuzio, a Venetian editor.
When?
1559.
Marco Polo died in
1324. 235 years earlier.
So the contemporary mockery...
Invented by a Renaissance editor 2.5 centuries after the fact.
Do we have any evidence his contemporaries mocked him?
We have evidence they believed him. Dominican friar Francesco Pipino translated the book into Latin in 1302, 4 years after it was written, and solemnly affirmed its truthfulness.
The deathbed quote?
First appears in a chronicle from around 1330, 6 years after Marco died. No eyewitness attribution.
So even the skepticism about Marco Polo is a myth.
Myths all the way down.
What about people who actually used his work? People who took it seriously as a source?
Christopher Columbus.
Christopher Columbus read Marco Polo?
Columbus annotated Marco Polo. His personal copy survives. Biblioteca Colombina, Sevilla. 366 handwritten notes on the margins.
And the asbestos passage.
He marked it. In Rome, a cloth of salamander. No skeptical comment, no question mark, just a note for future reference.
Columbus was planning to find the salamander cloth.
Columbus was planning to find everything. The man was making a shopping list for Asia.
Fireproof cloth, spices, gold, someone else's land. Standard explorer checklist.
Here's what should bother you. Medieval Venice was obsessive about record-keeping.
Trade records.
Customs registers, guild accounts, price lists. We know the cost of 17 different grades of wool. We know what Genoese merchants paid for pepper in Constantinople in 1287.
And asbestos?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Not one merchant account book, not one customs valuation, not one guild price list. Across 3 centuries of meticulous Mediterranean commerce, asbestos cloth doesn't appear once.
Because it wasn't being traded.
It was never a commodity. Too rare, too labor-intensive, too far outside normal supply chains. Asbestos was a gift from Mongol emperors to foreign dignitaries. You couldn't buy it. You had to be given it.
And gifts don't come with customs records.
Gifts don't generate paper trails.
What about fraud?
You'd think there'd be fraud cases.
Relic fraud.
Medieval merchants selling fireproof cloth as holy relics. This doesn't burn because it touched the true cross. Churches paid fortunes for that kind of proof.
And when it turned out to be mineral fiber instead of miracle,
You'd expect Inquisition records, ecclesiastical court proceedings, names, dates, depositions.
there's nothing.
Nothing. The fraud was profitable. The fraud was plausible. The fraud was never prosecuted, at least not in any record that survived.
Because asbestos was too rare for systematic deception.
You can't build a fraud industry around a material you can barely obtain.
Give it time. Once they figured out how to mine it at scale, the fraud got a lot more sophisticated, less holy relic and more safe for your children's crayons and school ceilings.
So here's the paradox. Marco Polo's account is virtually unique.
Because he documented something the medieval world knew existed and almost never wrote down.
A material that existed in the gaps.
Too rare to trade, too exotic to prosecute, too foreign to archive. The institutions that create records, trade, law, church, never captured it.
And Marco Polo just talked about it in prison.
To a romance writer who wrote it down, one of the only accounts we have because nobody else bothered.
So Marco Polo debunks the salamander myth, documents the mining process, names his source, technical, accurate, verifiable.
And then?
And then he says Kublai Khan sent an asbestos napkin to the Pope to wrap Jesus' burial shroud.
Of course he does.
Quote, "One of these cloths is now at Rome. It was sent to the Pope by the great Khan as a precious gift."
Is it there?
There is an asbestos cloth in the Vatican collection.
Okay.
It came from a pagan tomb on the Appian Way.
Of course it did.
Henry Ewell, 19th century scholar, definitive edition of Marco Polo's travels. He actually investigated this. The Vatican cloth is real, about 20 inches long, genuinely ancient.
But not from Kublai Khan.
Roman era. Predates Jesus by a significant margin.
So Marco Polo debunks the salamander myth and then immediately repeats a different myth.
He corrects the natural history. He accepts the sacred history. The material is real. The origin story is fabricated.
Myths within myths.
All the way down. So where does this leave us? 1298, Marco Polo, in a Genoese prison cell, dictates the truth about asbestos. Mineral, not animal. Geology, not magic. Quote, "The salamander is no beast."
And for the next 350 years...
The encyclopedists keep citing Aristotle. The bestiaries keep drawing salamanders in flames. The myth persists.
Why?
Because Marco Polo was a merchant. The encyclopedias were written by scholars, blessed by the church, copied in monasteries, taught in universities. One eyewitness against 4 centuries of institutional authority.
Eyewitness never had a chance.
Not until someone with credentials decided to check.
When?
1646.
That's 350 years later.
350 years, and a physician named Thomas Brown finally does what nobody had bothered to do that entire time.
Which is?
Throw a salamander in fire and see what happens.
It dies?
It dies.
4 centuries of shadowy scholarly debate exposed as garbage by one barbecue?
Next time, Thomas Brown throws a salamander into a fire, and the myth that wouldn't die finally does.
So Marco Polo told the truth in 1298. It took 350 years for anyone to prove it. And by then, asbestos was about to become something much more dangerous than a medieval curiosity.
The Industrial Revolution. The mines were opening, and nobody was asking what it did to the miners.
Here's the thing about documentation. Marco Polo's account survived because one romance writer in a Genoese prison thought it was worth writing down. Zurficar existed, probably, but we'll never prove it because nobody else bothered to keep records.
The asbestos industry learned that lesson.
They learned it well. For decades, they kept two sets of books, the public story, safe, controlled, nothing to worry about, and the internal memos, the ones that said things like, we save a lot of money that way when workers died.
Those memos exist.
Those memos are damning. And the team at Danziger and Diano has spent 30 years finding them. Exposed shipyard workers, refinery hands, construction crews who were never told what they were breathing. The companies counted on those workers becoming ghosts in the archives, names nobody would trace back.
They miscalculated.
If you're dealing with a mesothelioma diagnosis right now, or someone you love is, the exposure happens somewhere. And unlike Zurficar, there's a paper trail. Dandel.com. That's DANDELL.com.
Next week, Episode 9, The Myth That Wouldn't Die. That was a lot of Chinese pronunciation.
You did fine.
I said, Huoshu. Huoshu, like I knew what I was doing.
Did you?
No.
Fake it till you make it.
That's what Zurficar did.
You think Zurficar was fake?
I think Zurficar was real, and we just can't prove it. Which is worse, honestly.
Why worse?
Because it means there's this whole person, a Turkish mining supervisor who spent 3 years running asbestos operations for Kublai Khan, and the only reason we know he existed is because Marco Polo mentioned him once in a jail cell.
That's actually kind of sad.
History is full of Zurficars. People who did things and nobody wrote it down.
You're getting philosophical.
It's late.
Marco?
Oh.
Marco?
Polo.
There it is.
We're done.
We're done.